we'll do the live thing first. Like, hey everybody, welcome back to the podcast. It's me, your host, Bigmark. Thanks everyone for watching. We're gonna try things a little bit different today. We got a little new camera set up. Shout out John Harley giving us the new Zoom Q2 whatever, and cool. 4K usually, but guess what? We ain't got time for 4K, baby.
1080.
And guess what? Maybe one day we will if you join the Patreon. Patreon.com/thebigmarkpod. Check it out. Support the podcast. Lots of tiers out there for you to choose from. Super fun. If you're watching on YouTube, ring that bell. Make sure you get the notification so every time we release a video, you get to see it. And then, of course, we're everywhere else. So if you got some time, rate the podcast. Give us the best rating you can give. And, hey, if you want to give some feedback, too, we'd love to hear it.
Yeah, dude. Out here shredding tears, man.
You know what I'm saying? So, anyway, here we are today. And I'd like to welcome back in front of the camera this time.
Yeah. Changing it up.
Christian Aubin. He's been beside us before, but, hey, we'd love to have him back.
Yeah, thank you for having me, man.
How's it going?
It's good.
Good.
Life's always better on this side of the camera, too, you know?
That's right, baby.
Just a little aura, a little shine.
Right on. Yeah, so, we were kind of talking a little bit about, before things started here, we're talking about, so I was just reading this book, Behave by Robert Sapolsky, and super cool guy. He's a doctor. He specializes in like genetic research and stuff.
Correct.
He's a genetic research and genetic biologist, and he's got a lot of really interesting views. There's one, like, he's kind of well known for some of the information that he's put out on toxoplasmosis gondii,
right,
which is this parasite that we were talking about. Mm-hmm. Which, for anyone who's just listening and hasn't heard it before, it is this parasite that essentially it affects cats' brains, and it can actually get into humans too. But the way it actually gets into their brain is it infects rats. Actually, sorry, it lives in the cat's gut. I should say it lives in the cat's gut, but it gets into a mouse's brain, and then what it does is it flips the switch in the mouse's brain, and it makes it attracted to cat urine, which it's usually completely terrified of. It's completely abhorrent. It doesn't want anything to do with that. But somehow this parasite can get into its brain and flip this switch, which is insane. And essentially, so obviously these mice, they come out in the day, they come out of hiding where they're usually staying away from these cats. And all of a sudden they just come at them hard, and the cats end up eating them, obviously. And then that's how the parasite gets into their gut. So then the cat shits, and then that's how it can get into human brains.
So how does it get into the human brain part exactly from them?
So if it's because it's a parasite, it's kind of gonna be like around, like it might.
So it's
be like
airborne.
On the cat's fur a little bit, okay. And then all of a sudden you pet the cat, and then you touch your face and stuff like that, or like you eat food, whatever. Like, unfortunately, with cats, humans are handling their poo a lot, right? With
litter
kitty
boxes,
litter and stuff, yeah. Right? So they're kind of exposed to their feces a lot. And that's how it can kind of get transferred into the brain. And it's really interesting that I kind of heard this statistic in passing, so don't take it take it as with a grain of salt. But essentially,
drive-by just happened.
Yeah, essentially about 80%. I've heard 80% of motorcycle accident victims have this toxoplasmosis, which is crazy. And I heard like a really high number of Brazilian soccer players. Again, this is like super bro science, but I heard that, again, it's just really because apparently it kind of can create this more risk-taking behavior in humans.
So it's like motive is to make you more aggressive, more riskier, like,
because potentially if you're more riskier, you might die, and then once you're dead, they can then be passed on to the next thing and keep going and going. Like, who knows how these parasites work, right? Like, you can only assume in the simplest terms that they're just trying to find the easiest way to continue to procreate, right? Like, everything's just trying to replicate over and over and over, and I think maybe that's just their way somehow through trial and error and evolution and just like how things worked. Somehow they figured that out, and there's other toxins and other parasites out there that exist that that they also like make animals change their behavior. And it's really strange because so basically the Sapolsky thing with that is that he does this research on genetics and behavior, and that's a clear sign there that somewhere, at least that's what they think, that this parasite is working on switching genes on and off in these mice's brain, and that's what's actually changing their behavior, which is really interesting because again, Sapolsky, he mentions in this book Behave, which I'm actually still currently reading, so I haven't got through the whole thing yet.
What have you gone through so far?
I will admit, about halfway through.
What have you read about?
He's done a lot of kind of like introduction still in the book,
sure.
of like a lot of like neuroanatomy and stuff, and just how kind of general genetic stuff kind of works. So he's kind of saying that, like, it's interesting because really what genetics do is it brings up the question of like nature versus nurture.
Sure.
Obviously, right? So it's like, how much does our genetics actually predispose us to what we're going to become? Like what we're born with, is that a complete blueprint of what we're going to be? Is that a guideline? Does it have really nothing to do with it, and it's all environment? Like one of the things he said in the book, Sapolsky said in the book, was animals with more genes tend to be more susceptible to environmental changes. So it's animals with less, or organisms with less genes, that are actually gonna probably stay the same and not be and pass their genetic variants down through generations without a lot of environmental change. Where with humans, and the biggest issue with human genetics is that basically you may have that gene, but whether it's turned on or off is one thing, and then whether you experience that behavior or something happens to you in life that you're more susceptible because of that gene being on. So for example, there's a gene that makes you more susceptible to schizophrenia, and that can be passed on, and that's part of the reason why they say schizophrenia is genetic, is because of this gene. And if it's switched on, and then you have like a traumatic event or some type of abuse or episode or something happens, there's probably a more likely chance that you're going to kind of tip over into that more into turning on that, or sorry, I should say more like anxiety and depression in that sense. So there are genes for anxiety and depression, just as the schizophrenia one. Those would probably be more apropos, that if you experience some trauma, that you're more likely to fall into an anxious or depressive state. And again, both those are kind of gender-based too, that you see a little bit more autism and schizophrenia in males, and then you see a little bit more anxiety and depression in females. So it depends on if you have that gene, and then if something bad happens to you, then you'll probably, again, still probably, turn out the way that gene would, as we say, predict what's going to happen. But there's no real prediction, and that's the hardest part, is that we have a lot of genes, not infinite amount, but we have a lot of genes that there's enough that they can be affected by the environment, and that is the hardest part about genetics, because essentially they just say genetics are these predicting factors. People are doing mapping the genome, they're looking at genetics before the child's born to say, hey, is this child going to be whatever? Are they going to have any disabilities? Are they going to have any, anything wrong with them? Whatever, quote unquote, like, abnormalities. And again, basically genes load the gun, but environment pulls the trigger. So like, yeah, genes can kind of set you up, but if your environment is different, then it'll go a whole other way. That's so totally unpredictable. That's awesome, man. Which is super cool. So again, that's the thing, is that what is that thing, like deep down, that is going in and switching on those on and off those genes? Again, we started talking about this parasite thing. So there is a channel obviously into the brain to create some type of, and whether the parasite uses chemical messengers or something, I'm not 100% sure, but we know that it's changing the behavior of these mice. So what about those genes actually do modulate their behavior, and therefore what about a behavior then goes back to modulate the genes, right? And that's where I think things get a little bit more cosmic, where we're getting into a little bit more of the collective unconscious, or then I think Rupert Sheldrake's ideas that we talked about before last time we were on about the harmonic resonance and everything, that's that whole thing where there's some kind of idea that is being passed on almost through these genes, and our behavior then goes on and switches on and off genes, and then those genes then go and back and regulate our behavior. So it's almost like this
there's definitely got to be something said for that happening. But I think at the core, it would have to be some sort of like chemistry thing to begin with.
Okay.
Would it not?
Sure. It could.
In some sense, right? Like physiologically.
Yes. Right.
Because like that's how you would obtain it. So I'm assuming that's maybe how like the source would come about.
Sure.
But then at some point too, it's almost like inner in this like intelligence almost like kind of also adapts to it in a way. Like you're able to like the crazy stat 80% of bikers or bike accidents brains.
Right.
Like that's a huge percentage.
Sure. Something like that. I mean, again,
So it's like no, it's cool. I was just gonna finish off with a point on how like for it to change their chemistry in such a way for them to take more risks and endanger themselves, but also be cool with it. It's almost like just like a different perspective on it, which is so crazy because to them they might like what other signs are there for humans and to show like they got this parasite
that they have toxoplasmosis. I'm not 100% sure.
No.
Jack, you wanna just search real quick? Just we got Jack Williams on behind the
What's
camera
up,
helping us out, making sure nothing goes haywire.
We got the trio, man, the triangle of love here, bro.
That's right. These boys are gonna be starting a podcast soon. We mentioned last time.
Yeah.
But I can't wait to be on.
Yes. Soon up.
Am I gonna be the first guest?
We should, yes.
Nice.
We should definitely have you for sure as the first.
So what's toxoplasmosis saying there, Jackie B?
So what are we looking for now?
What are symptoms of toxoplasmosis in humans?
In human sapiens
Because,
and beings.
Again, it's saying like risk-taking behavior, but are there any other ones? Just for anyone listening,
right?
Make sure if you got a cat, be careful.
Right.
Because actually,
let's see what Google says.
Oh yeah, man, it's so nuts.
Lung problems.
Okay. So maybe like vision. Breathe it in. Maybe humans breathe it in. That's how it gets into humans. Potentially.
I could imagine so. Like again, if you're talking like the environment of cats and shit, and like cat's owner. Again, you guys brought up like litter box, like that alone is just creating like
like you're just around.
Is that a way to catch it?
So like
airborne
think about it, if you're a parasite, if you're a somehow conscious parasite, you're thinking about, all right, there's this other thing around us. There's this cat that cats are, especially domestic house cats, they're almost always associated with a human. So like as the parasite, you'd be like, now there's this other organism that we could potentially infect. And if they're always just, if it's all like, because the way I kind of understand like bacteria and virology and all that, it's just like this, like they're just constantly trying to grow their territory. It's just like the Roman Empire. They're just constantly trying to grow. They don't even know why. It's just chaos.
Right.
And it's just like, we're just trying to get big. And then there's other forces of nature trying to keep that down. And when it gets haywire, bad stuff happens, i.e. pandemics, i.e. mold, even just growing on your stuff, right? There's always
for sure.
There's always a little battle even happening like in your food, and once those good bacteria lose the battle, the bad bacteria take over. Same in your gut. Like that's my understanding more or less of how like bacteria and viruses kind of just and parasites, I should say, kind of just do it.
Life's a constant battle, man. And
they're just trying to just stay living and reproduce and just keep going and keep going, right? So if you're like a conscious parasite, you're gonna go, hey, look, there's this giant organism that's also always around these cats that we've been infecting. How can we get into them? Because again, obviously, there's a lot of diseases.
Do you think you have this parasite?
Me?
Yeah,
I had a cat for a while. But I don't see myself as like a risk.
Sounded so offended. Me?
No, I just like, I don't know. I didn't even think.
I could never have a parasite.
Me? No, I meant like.
No cats in this barn.
I had a cat for a little bit. Its litter box like was in the basement far away from us that we didn't go to very often.
80%.
And I don't consider myself a very risk-taking person. So if I was like
Fingers crossed.
oddly risk-taking, like I don't
Sure.
even like roller coasters and stuff. Like I don't. So maybe, who knows?
Really?
Never been tested.
Sure.
I did have a buddy who was around who had some mental health issues, and his family had a cat, but no one ever did any tests or anything.
Must have been some pretty stinky shit for sure.
Who know? Like again, who knows, right? Like I don't know if literally every cat has it. I don't know if
Sure.
if there's no mice around, how is it ever going to get it, right? Like,
Was there
if
any
the-
like
if the-
regional stats on this stuff?
I don't know. Are there any toxoplasmosis stats?
Like most like predominant areas for it to be a thing? Because even when you mention like motorcycle accident, to me I think of like East Asia area where there are more bike accident stuff there. Because culturally too, they seem to munch on a few of those things. Like
well, they're a little
cockroaches,
bit more open
dogs,
with stuff like that. So
right,
who knows
cat.
what types of parasites, right? Because
Sure, rats
I was
and
going to say
cells.
there's only so many diseases out there that do actually transfer from animals to humans.
Yeah.
A lot of them are just in the animal. There are vectors, they call them, like between the animal and humans. Like with what they told us about COVID, it was like a bat, right? And like
Right.
Ebola, they said was like a monkey at some point.
I
AIDS,
thought it was
they said,
pig.
or was it pig?
It was
Or pangolin was
Something
COVID
like that.
even now.
Yeah.
Right, like a bat bit a pangolin.
Yes.
Like it was this wild thing. So there has to be like some vectored other animal in between. Crazy. So one of the worst I've heard from Steve Ranella, shout out Steve Ranella, Meat Eater Podcast. He talks about there's like this muscle wasting disorder that deer have, and like literally it's like chronic muscle wasting, and they get it, and literally their muscles.
Is that when they're like
just,
zombified?
They just look like skeletons. Like their freaking muscles just waste away.
Oh.
And I don't know if that's a parasite or a bacteria of some type, but it's some
That's
type of
crazy.
disease.
Yeah, it looks like.
And they said if that jumps to humans, it's going to be bad. So
yeah.
anyway,
Just go to bed, wake up overnight, be fucking
Your
skinny.
arm's gone.
like
but
essentially,
gone.
yeah, like you just
could
like
just
never worked
see,
out
like your
ever.
femur.
Oh,
It's like,
for
hey,
sure.
dude.
Ugh.
So
Peace.
Yeah,
You
so
know.
to answer the question you
Okay.
guys asked, it's mostly found in like warm, moist climates, which
Okay.
like relates again to like being airborne.
Yeah.
If you got a load of like cat shit everywhere,
Yeah.
and
Yeah.
then it's just getting warmed up.
Yeah. We're talking by the
yeah, that's the thing.
around the
And like certain
equator.
cultures are more apt
Sniffers.
to have cats. Like not every. I mean, I wonder what that is like. But a lot of cultures are kind of closer to cats, I'd say, than others. You know what I mean?
Sure.
Like obviously look
Yeah.
at like ancient Egyptian.
They're definitely
culture,
symbolizing a lot of different cultures for sure.
big time, and
Yeah.
like people
Like the
have
pharaoh
cats,
cats.
and even just animals in general are pretty, like in certain cultures are much more respected, I'd say, than we do in some cases.
For
like
sure.
it varies person to person in our culture, I find.
Oh, yeah.
Way-
You're either a cat
whether-
person or a dog person
or
or
dog
whatever it
person,
may be.
and even if you are one of the two, like you either really love them or they're
Right.
more like they're like your pet. And like if it's a dog, they're like, this is my fucking dog.
Yeah,
It
it's my-
sleeps outside.
Right.
Like I love it, but if I have to kill it because it's rabid, I'm not gonna cry. But then there's some people where it's like literally
It's like
a
my
f-
best
It's a
friend.
family member, and
Right.
they'll pay grands to make sure that it's okay. And like I totally respect that. My grandmother and aunt were like that. Like when a dog or cat died, it was like losing a family member. Big deal. So I get it. Like it was a big deal. So some people are like that, and I was kind of a little bit more. Just hit the space bar there, Jackie, just so it doesn't go to sleep on us. And thanks, brother.
Producer.
Oof.
Yeah, that's what we got him for.
Behind the
baby.
camera things,
Step
yeah.
in.
Yeah, skinny menris.
But yeah, like it's interesting. So it's nice to hear that it exists more in warmer climates. So maybe it's not as prevalent in Canada. And
Sure. We're in a
again,
subhumid.
Yeah.
Yeah,
so maybe that
and
has something to do
and
with
maybe
it.
because it gets cold. I mean, still,
Do
like,
extra cleans in the
we
summer.
keep freaking tropical plants.
Winter
inside,
cleanse,
so it's
dude.
not like they can't
Just
live
to
inside.
freeze over.
Like they might be able to live inside somehow. We do have like people are able to keep tropical plants and keep things inside. So it maybe it can exist, but
just warm.
again, really interesting, and again, just the fact that it's almost it almost even speaks a little bit to psychedelics, that like something can get into our brain chemistry or even like the brain like anatomy, right? And just little thing, it's a little tiny thing it just takes to just change your entire outlook, behavior, perspective, whatever. Obviously in the case of these parasites, and for the bad, well, in the case of the parasite, for the good, but it depends on your perspective. But again, you know, it's like I always saw that, like, you know, even taking like LSD and stuff, like it's like one little square of paper. I'm just gonna, it's tasteless, odorless, goes on my tongue, and next thing you know, I'm seeing the universe, right? And like that's, to me, just again reiterates that this reality just isn't always it isn't everything. It isn't the whole story. And I think so many people are living their daily lives that is everything.
Well, yeah. I think what you brought up earlier was really interesting, how you mentioned that parasite getting in and like something cosmic changing the genes, like turning on this like on and off switch. What's doing that right now without us having the parasite? And what is it controlling that?
Right.
I think that's the whole cosmic stuff and the whole like morphic resonance theory. Like, in what way does that, for one, change it to begin with the parasite, and then two, you can even dive deeper and say like, what is it? How am I being controlled now? What is the genes being turned on off, and what is controlling those genes being turned on and off right now?
Right. Well, there's how many
plasmas?
Right. How many plasmas we got going on that we don't know about?
Right.
That's like changing how I react and act in different situations based off what I might have had or ate or whatever in the past. Even traveling. Like, what if I had something in some other country and brought it over here, and it's still in my brain?
COVID.
Don't know.
Well, again,
right.
Well, again, like I said, it's that feedback.
And then I come back happier. It's making me happy because it's changing my.
Where the genes influence behavior, but the behavior influences genes, and the genes, and it's this constant loop of your behaviors are, you know, according to some of the science, are changing these genes. So there is this school of thought called behavioralism. It was one of the biggest proponents of it was the scientist B.F. Skinner. I think it was kind of really coined in the 40s and 50s. It was not very old, but it was this whole idea that essentially there's not really any like human free will, that we are just complete slaves of our behavior.
Robert was saying the same thing. He's talking about that with like violence.
That's the behavioralist. That's the big stuff. The behavioralist stuff that Sapolsky talks all the time is that we have that our again. It's, as I was talking about that feedback loop. It's more so that the behavior dominates that loop.
Right.
That again, the more the as the behavior is rewarded, then you continue to do it, and then you're just led by a series of behaviors. You're not really you know, thinking, okay, I'm gonna go do this because I want to, because of my free will.
Right.
You're just about to do that because of infinite amount of moments, like you said, infinite amount of moments up into the present have led you to then make this decision.
Crazy.
You think that's true?
It's tough, man. I remember learning it in school, and it was like really,
like,
it was heavy,
like,
huge.
think about it. Even when you pause yourself.
Yeah.
Is that
maybe that's why habits are so powerful?
right?
Yeah.
Without a doubt. Go further.
It's a strong possibility.
Like, what could the habits do for you?
Well, again, just kind of what you said. It creates that cycle, like behaviors, which would eventually create your gene based off of that, right? So then you're changing your whole environment, and just like you said, the environment would pull the trigger, but your habits would be the like internal being changed.
Yeah, like if behavioralism is true, how many behaviors can you have?
Right.
Like, you know what I mean? It goes so far to suggest there's only like one, because you're looking backwards, but imagine looking forwards with like a multiplicity of options.
Sure.
Right.
So it's like, what's the thing that jumps us
We're
from
trying to kind of just find the easiest way. So that's the idea, is that we're trying to find the path of least resistance through behavior. So if we just continue to do the right behavior, eventually things are just going to go like it's this strange human existence thing. It's this paradox that there's always this endless thing that we'll strive for, even though it's unattainable. And it has to be unattainable for us to strive for it.
I asked this question on our first shroom trip to you.
Okay.
And I don't know if you remember saying the answer to this.
Okay.
But I asked you, like, to the core, why? Just life, what's the point? Why?
Yeah.
Okay.
Just, and you're like, because it just gives us something to do.
Right. Classic. That sounds like me.
And it clicked for like it's turned a flip switch for me. Just boom.
Yeah.
Well,
because again, like we have there's a great possibility that at some point we have decided to join the human experience. Mm-hmm. That outside of this 3D reality, we actually have a choice of where to go. And was it one of you two that you were telling you guys had a dream about like you could like pick like an experience? Yeah. Was that you?
Yeah.
Where you were like,
I could like jump off a cliff and pop something up and like fly
and then
down.
like it was almost like a little bit like if anyone's watched Midnight Gospel, you know how Clancy like chooses like what incarnation he wants to go. That's what that reminded me of.
Right,
where it's like,
man, that's how my dreams are.
And that's dude. Like that is based, I think, on a Buddhist principle of like at a certain point, like between life and death, you get to choose like which timeline, which experience to do. What experience? But the cost is that you forget that you chose
from before.
Yeah, right. That you chose to join that until it's over, and then you're like, oh, right, that was great.
Yeah.
Like I don't know.
Alan Watts has a line about that where he's like, if you could dream a dream, like if you could dream any dream you wanted to any night, eventually you would dream the dream that you forget it's a dream and that you have no control. You know what I mean? Like you would first start with like all the vast riches and everything you've ever wanted. Then you do personal relationships and da-da-da-da. And eventually you get to the point. Eventually you get to the point where you just be like, yeah, let me have it completely random. Like I have no idea what's coming next, and
that's what he explains. Like manifestation.
Yeah.
Well, that's like imagine if we were playing a game and it was an infinite game. At a certain point, you'd get bored of the rules and be like, I want to.
This the game of life, man.
Right? Like if you are manifesting it completely, you would literally go, all right, I'm going to just turn off the fact that I know that this is a game.
Sure.
I'm just going to do that because I know I'm safe.
That's a part of the game.
I know I'm perfectly safe because the spirit is eternal. But yet, when I'm also turning off, it's like settings on your video game.
Right.
You're turning up like full damage. You're turning up like if you die, you die.
Infinite ammo, dude.
Right. No extra lives.
Yeah.
Right. This is life. You get one shot, and sometimes you, if you live like in a certain way, you might be more. There might be a greater possibility of you dying. And then sometimes you can play it safe, and then you can live a long life, and it might be safe or whatever. But as soon as you do die, maybe there's this whole thing where it's like, oh, that was this game. Man, I just decided to do
my
this.
mirror moment.
I wonder if like being a good person or a bad person has an influence on the choice that you can make after.
Karma.
Right, karma, exactly. Like what if me being a douchebag and just a shitty person all my life versus someone who goes by morals and I guess like intuition, versus fighting that off and being like some like I don't know repentful person. Does that have influence on the choice that I can make into the next life? Like nope, you only can make so many decisions. Like there's like a cap because you didn't succeed the main mission of the you know what I'm saying? Yeah.
I see that a little bit more as it's a little bit. I think it might be more subjective. I think what we would experience would be so totally objective that it wouldn't see things as like bad or good. Like it'd be like that was an experience. Maybe it wasn't like maybe didn't get you close. Like again, this is the thing is like what do we actually want to attain? Because I think once we're past life, like that we're talking past and like that's maybe enlightenment, but we're now in this whole new realm. Where we're looking at our previous and post lives, it's like it's like at that point, how much more do you want, right? So at that point, I feel like we would transcend like good and bad and evil and good, because again, it's that yin yang symbol, right?
Right.
And the yin yang symbol isn't a picture; it's a movie.
Sure.
There's movement in it. There's the dark. Big fishtail looks like a tadpole. Then there's the white looking thing, and the big thick meat of the white has a big black dot in the middle, and then it trails off infinitely into that tail. Because it's a circle, it's infinite. And the same thing at the black, and there's a little bit of dark in the light, and there's a little bit of light in the dark, and that is that whole idea that one isn't good and one isn't bad. It's all relative, and one thing needs to exist for the other. The dark needs to exist for the light to shine, and the log needs to exist to burn. But like Viktor Frankl says, you know, what burns brightly must endure burning, right? So there has to be a entropy, or there has to be a destruction for there to be a rebuilding.
Mm-hmm.
But people are so afraid of that destruction,
Right.
because it can seem so dangerous or painful, that we avoid it at all costs, and that doesn't
Jump.
That
There's
doesn't
water
list,
at the bottom.
Yeah, exactly.
and that doesn't lead to any new revelations, because you're just avoiding what we think is scary, and it's the unknown. But Mirabai Bush, really, really cool. She's super big in like the Buddhist, like Ram Dass and Krishna Das, and Mirabai Bush. She said, "Why be afraid of the unknown? Because you don't know anything about it. Shouldn't be scary. You don't even know. So why are you afraid of something you don't know about?" But yet, that is one of the scariest things for anyone to even try and comprehend. And I think, again, certain aspects of art and meditation and psychedelics can delve into that darkness, or that unknown, and it's not dark. There's much more information there. There's just as much, right? Like there's not much more, but there's just as much information as there is in the light.
Right.
And I think everyone tries to go to the light, and you know, a lot of main religions are all about renouncing Satan and renouncing evil and bad, and you're bad, and be punished for your sins and live in this purgatory. Like, you know, even what you were saying, like, will the lives we lead affect the lives after? Maybe, but that's kind of a Christian idea, right? Where there's going to be this purgatory, that if you do something wrong now, you know, you're gonna live in this purgatory where nothing happens, and then all of a sudden you're gonna go to hell, or you're gonna go to heaven. You're gonna be judged. It's like there's all these other things after life. It's like we have no idea what's gonna go down there, and you know, as long as if you get to experience certain things in this reality, i.e. doing certain psychedelics, and you realize there's so much more past this reality,
Right.
you don't really get ideas like that as much.
Right.
You get more ideas like what we're talking about,
Sure.
that you get to go and you get to choose where you get to go and all this stuff. And there's so much more personal, like, agency, I feel, in those moments, rather than this purgatory where you're so helpless, or even in hell and you're being poked with pitchforks and burning and shit, and you're like, like, I see so much more power and control in the best way, in the nicest, most positive way, with this idea, that now that I've seen a little bit past this veil of reality, that I can say, hey, there's so much more. And these ideas that there's going to be this purgatory and this judgment are based on 3D ideas. It's based on, you know,
Human creation.
if I punch you, you're going to be hurt. If I drop a rock on my toe, it's going to, like, there's certain rules in this reality that will give you ideas, like, oh, there's going to be punishment, and there's going to be all this bad stuff. Also, don't get me wrong, there's all this in organized religion, there's a lot of mass control, because that's how they used to take care of the people back in the day, like peasants out in the wilderness. They gave them the idea that God is always watching over them, but also watching their bad stuff, so that they don't go killing people and robbing villages and raping and this and that. So it's great, but all those ideas of control and guilt were bastardized through all the centuries, where popes were using that for their own gain and power, and then there wasn't really a separation between church and state. So a lot of those rules became laws. And then even today, we're still dealing with a lot of that stuff that was purely Christian or religious ideals that have now become laws, or even just values that we look at in Western society as good and bad. A lot of it's just developed from these organized religion ideas that, don't get me wrong, there is a kernel of truth to all those religions, and the golden rule is real, like treat others as you want to be treated. And the biggest thing I always took away from Jesus was that he said that the kingdom of the kingdom of heaven is within you, right? Like, that's the biggest thing I always took away from Christianity, is that literally Jesus, God, is saying God is within you. You don't have to go and find him anywhere else. And to me, that is the true nugget of Christianity, that we are God, right? Just as we've learned through psychedelics, that I am you and you are me, we are all God, and we are all this one large consciousness. That's, I think, how Jesus is telling us that.
Right. Eat my bread.
Right. And
have some shrooms.
Teach a man to fish, right? Eat my body, right? That's what Jesus says, eat my body, drink my blood.
Bread, eat my body, yeah.
And become me. As me, right? And that's like eating mushrooms. You become as God.
As one.
And that's why there's been a lot of pushback on the church against psychedelics, because they want to be the only road to God. They don't want to have you able to just go pick some shit in the woods, chew on it, and talk to God one-on-one. Like they want to be able to control that racket. And again, unfortunately, that's just been bastardized through all that everything I just said, all the church and state stuff. And that's why when they came over and started North America, they wanted to separate it as much as they could. Because even up until that point, there was lots of religious influence on the state, because a lot of the state were still monarchies and kings and queens and stuff. So they all had like a bishop or a pope or like a cardinal to go talk to, and he would go and he would tell them what to do and be like, God says
send a pigeon.
Everything's gonna be all good or whatever, right? Like, who knows how these guys were, right? If they were smart, they might have not even bought it, and they're just like, hey, yeah, God said do this, do that. You know what I'm saying? So it's really interesting that, unfortunately, that's where that went, because it probably all started from, potentially plant medicine experiences and psychedelic experiences where, you talk about what we talked about with Sarah, the stoned ape theory, right? Where at some point, if our previous ancestors, some type of ape-like creature, ate like enough mushrooms to be not hungry anymore. Like, I'm not even saying, oh, they ate a couple mushrooms. I'm saying literally they were hungry, like starving in the woods, and
dinner
they found all these mushrooms. Like, yes, we're stoked, and they ate it up, and then they're like, oh, I'm full now. That's how much mushroom they ate. Like, think about it. You can eat 5 grams, which is really like a mouthful. That's how about I think the average bite is like, if you took a bite of a sandwich, it's like 3 grams. So literally a bite can like send you to Mars. Mind you, they were probably eating fresh. So usually when you eat fresh mushrooms, you kind of have to eat a lot more than dried.
Right.
But still, imagine just being this ape-like creature, and your friggin' brain is just being fried.
Just talking to God.
100%. Well, like if there's never been an idea, like you think about like how does the idea of God even come up, and like that's where it could have happened. The idea, like, wow, we are part of something bigger. Even that alone, right? Because that's probably like one of the first lessons you learn, I think, like on psychedelics, is that we are a part of something much, much bigger than what we see with what we see and taste and feel and touch and hear with our senses, which I think a lot of people don't ever experience anything even close to that. So again, think about, you're just living your life based on these 3D reality rules, and you're going to have a lot of issues, because if there's so much more to the reality, you're missing so much. Like, I'm not saying in any shape or form I know what these other aspects of reality are. I just know that there's more to it. And just that
perspective,
small little perspective switch change has given me a lot of peace, and it's given me a lot more understanding of a lot of people and their situations, and just,
we're all looking at the same thing. It's just a different angle.
Right. And that's the thing. When we look at each other, it's a mirror, right? It's not, it is a reflection of us. And especially when we do have resistance and trouble with people, that's usually highlighting the part that we need to really look at ourselves too, right?
More than ever. Yeah.
Right. Yeah, it's like, I think, again, that's the one thing with
mushrooms
for sure. But just like when people get so caught up in their whole life, and they think that this is it, that they start having like Truman Show feelings, that they're the only person, and everyone in their whole life is kind of an actor in this play that's surrounded by them. And I think that is probably one of the furthest iterations of the ego, that it is going so far, it's going outside of your own person, and it's starting to even, your ego is now, it's gone so big now, it's inhabiting you in my own mind. So my own ego has now got into you, and it's taking what your behaviors and what you say, and it's distorting them, and by the time it gets to me, I'm hearing different things. Like, again, it's in the cosmic way, feelings. Yeah. Again, because really the ego communicates in emotion, right? I don't think it communicates in words, really. We can translate some of those emotions into words, but I think all this stuff, even even the collective unconscious, I think it's an emotional thing, right? Because thoughts and stuff are fleeting and they're transient, but emotions, right, they can be transferred to people, and they can be passed on. You can feel, and they're powerful, and they make changes, and those are the biggest things that actually influence inner brain chemistry, is your actual emotional state, not just like what you're thinking about, right? Because you could be happy as hell and start thinking about crazy shit, and you're still happy.
Sure.
You won't have the same chemical reactions in your brain as if you're like, already feeling bummed and then thinking about heavy duty bad stuff. Again, that's almost back to that whole, if you already have the gene, then you experience some bad stuff, then it's going to be bad. But if you don't have the gene and you experience some bad stuff, there's no guarantee that gene's going to activate, or the behavior that gene usually deals with is going to activate, right?
Well, that's how I think with psychedelics, is like you can take the psychedelic, you can get the gene, let's say, but then do you take the further step to experience the work that makes that gene work? Right?
Sure.
Is like the efforts and the use afterwards,
right,
sort of thing. Because again, anyone can just get high.
Yeah.
Like anyone can just take 5 grams.
Yeah.
Well, I mean,
and many people have, and they've just partied, and they just like, oh, that was fun. Went to, even my first time, I went to a concert.
Yeah.
And look at me now, like.
See, that's what I find so interesting. I've never done that amount, like, publicly.
Yeah, me neither.
It's just solo.
And I feel
which spooks
responsible for that
too.
Because I've always been a big proponent of like I'm not a big guy to do it in public, even though it was my first time that I did it in public. I'm the last person to say.
You don't advocate for it.
Well, I'm just like, and especially the way you guys have even done it, you guys have never really used it to party. A lot of people, their first real way in.
Yeah. Sorry.
But you know what it's like, and maybe you have used it to party, and I have in a sense, but it wasn't your first time. And I think a lot of people, their very first time, they use it to go to a concert or go to a house party and stuff like that. And yeah, maybe you can have an interesting time, but are you learning stuff? Like
what kind of intelligence are you trying to pick up?
Something's talking to you that whole time, and you're just like, woo. Is it going like, yo, man, let's sit down, listen to me, what's going on here? Like, you have a chance, your ego is gone right now, you have a chance to friggin' learn a couple things. Like, what's going on? You're just partying.
Yeah.
Like, even like people on ecstasy and stuff, and they're experiencing like ultimate love, and they're just like, oh, this is great. Like, yeah, it's great. Past great. It's the most awesome thing. You're literally bathed in potentially what the universe is like made of, and somehow this drug is allowing you to literally just live in that whole zone with no other thing actually really involved. Where I find shrooms really just like opens the door, and like you can experience like any aspect of the universe at that point. Where again, I haven't had really good personal experience with ecstasy, but that's what I've heard. It's just waves of love and happiness, and it sounds like euphoric, but again, setting are super important. But at the same time, shrooms are able to take you other places, and sometimes it's not all fun and games, but it's, if you're open and you're ready, you're going to learn a few things. And it takes a lot of it. There's going to be some effort, and you're going to have to unfortunately crack a few eggs to make the omelet, and that egg happens to be a reality, and you're going to have to shatter it. But that also just reveals how much your ego is tied to this AKA reality. And it always brings me back that the ego is the guide to this reality. It comes with this reality. It's almost like when you in that metaphor we're using of logging into the game, if you log into this human experience you get an ego. It comes with you. It's like Crash Bandicoot, you know, that little Ooga
Yeah,
Booga
yeah,
guy
yeah.
that would like float by you. Yeah, Ooga Booga Booga.
Yeah.
Right? That's what I imagine, like your ego, a healthy ego.
Right.
That he's there to help you and guide you, and if something happens, it'll actually pick you up if you fall. But it can also turn evil and overtake you and want to just make every decision for you. So I think that behavioralism, if we're going to come back to behavioralism, is that's almost like they've psychologically defined ego.
The destruction of ego?
No, just like we're slaves to this behavior, that the behavior is the ego, right? Like that, where it says all these infinite moments in time have led up to this moment. That's like, yeah, your ego has guided you this whole time into this moment right now, and
which
it's
questions
helpful.
free will again.
But that's the thing, is that at what point is there no free will because the ego has just taken over?
Right.
And yeah, now you don't have any free will because you're just making moves based on what your ego tells you to do, or you have realized that the ego is there and is helping you and giving you suggestions, but they're not commands. They're just guidelines. And I think a lot of people, because of how the ego is set up, is that it can easily get overinflated because it has to be there. It has to try and be this constant voice, that if you're not vigilant in your own spirit and making sure you're on top of your own inner workings beyond the ego, that the ego can overtake your consciousness. It can become your consciousness, and then it can become yourself, and then that's you only think you are the ego, right? Again, that's the biggest. The ego is the biggest con man in all existence. It has tricked you into thinking that it is you. But all the ego is what you think other people think of you, which can never ever be validated.
No.
Because even if you ask the other person, they tried their best to tell you, they might not be able to put it into words. They might lie. You might not be able to hear it properly. You might not understand it.
Right.
There's too many layers in between.
Lying.
Right. Exactly. You might think they're lying. You might think that they're telling the truth, even though they're lying.
Sure.
Right? Like there's so many different ways that you will never actually completely validate what you think other people think of you. Which is dumb.
Go along with the ride.
Like, oh, I think this guy thinks I'm stupid. Like that's an egotistical thought. Oh, these people think I'm fucked.
It's mentally draining too to be in that mindset.
How do you know? You have no idea. Did they say you were fucked? Did they tell you you were fucked?
Right.
Like, no.
Out of the 1 in 1,000 things that they're probably thinking about.
Yeah, there's some times that maybe you should have your eyes open and be like, yeah, okay, they told me to fuck off and I gotta fuck off. But so many times you're just like, you create all these things in your mind and you're like, oh no, what do I do? And that's the ego. And it's healthy because there's times like, oh, you know, you're looking at a cliff and your mind goes, oh, what happens if I jump off that for fun? Oh, I die. Okay, cool. That's a healthy ego because you're literally playing out something that's not real. It's a hypothetical situation, and it's going to keep you safe, right? Or like, what happens if I, cross this river at a certain time? Or like, maybe I can wait later. Or like this, if I go out now, a tiger's going to eat my ass. Like, that's good paranoia.
Sure.
But now we live in a society, at least we do nice in Hamilton, in Canada, and, where we are, thankfully, we're living a life where we're not being chased by tigers and being scared out of our wits all the time. So we create these new issues and anxieties and concerns that our brain almost craves. It almost needs these inputs.
Well,
right?
it can also be kind of healthy in that sense too, because it's almost like your ego is like a self audit for your like day-to-day tasks, and like you can almost in a sense like mold your ego to like kind of be like maybe I don't want to do so much of this, you know what I mean? That's kind of where your like morals and ethics could also be shaped as well within that, based off of maybe experience, right? Like the whole like Crash Bandicoot thing, like which hard drive am I going to get downloaded into, and then how do those experience shape and mold your ego to be like, okay, this is where we're going, let's resume.
That's like, again, that's the healthiest manifestation, I think, of the ego. And I think, again, you do want it to be there to guide you. And I think, again, that's the thing, is that we don't really understand we still don't really understand that it's not really us. I think it's very, very abstract, and it's an interesting concept to imagine this part of us that exists outside of kind of like who we are inside, or it's a part of it, at least right now. You know, maybe it's kind of a symbiotic relationship where it is us, but yet isn't, right, in the sense that it is, again, it's this guide that's just it's gonna be there to take you through, and there's times where it needs to tap you on the shoulder and say, hey, you know,
Right.
maybe you shouldn't do this, or maybe you should think about, you know, what's going to happen, what kind of consequences. And again, that kind of develops more with like a prefrontal cortex, and that's like higher operational thinking and stuff. But again, it's hard sometimes to realize until you've kind of separated from this thing that we call the ego. Again, I've had experiences on psychedelics where I'm coming down and I'm sitting in a room, and I literally, it feels like my ego has entered the room. Like it walked through the door and it's kind of in, and it literally came into the room like, hey, look at me. Like, fuck, shut up, everybody, stop talking. Me, right now. And obviously I know no one else can hear this, but I'm kind of like, but then I'm like, yo, man, sit down. We love you. Relax. Everyone's chilling. Come on, join the party. And it kind of goes like, you can feel like there's this energy change where it's like, all right, cool. Like it almost wants to be accepted, because so many things are like, dissolve your ego, remove the ego, get rid of the ego.
Right.
So that almost conflates it even more, because it's like, fuck you, I need to be here.
Yeah.
You need me.
You can't get rid of me.
I do. I love you too, but I can be overbearing, and I want to run the show, but I know I shouldn't. But I will if you let me. I do. Yeah. Right? So it's almost like, again, don't let the ego overrun the show. Right. But I think, again, like, it's interesting. I just keep thinking back to that metaphor that we talked about, where you kind of have this like opening sequence of existence where you're like, what existence am I going to choose? Right. And it's just like so many movies and TV shows and stuff, like Westworld. Have you ever seen Westworld? Really, really cool show. It's based on this old movie that essentially, for anyone who hasn't seen it, essentially it's in the future, and it's like this adult kind of like like amusement park, but it's like hyper realistic Wild West world, like the old Wild West Westworld. So there's cowboys and natives and, you know, villages and maidens and friggin' barkeeps and all that stuff, but they're all like robots. They're all like really highly sophisticated robots, and people pay big bucks to then go and have experiences with these robots. You can tell them whatever, you can have sex with them, you can kill them, like literally you can do whatever you want. And it's all this like cathartic experience for really rich people, just to blow off steam and all this stuff. But at the beginning of each like quest or whatever you're going to do, you get to choose whether you're going to be a black hat or a white hat. And in old Wild West stuff, the black hats were the bad guys, and the white hats were like the good guys. That's just kind of how it worked. So it's really interesting to me, because you mentioned, you know, what do you choose? Do you choose good? Do you choose bad? But if you literally, again, this is what I'm talking about supreme objectivity, is that at a certain point, you'll have experienced every good thing that you're going to be like, what about all this bad stuff? And you'll live an existence of evil.
Right.
But it's still an existence, and it's still a part of whatever this reality is, and it has to be lived, because you need balance.
Yeah, exactly.
But yet, again, we look at it subjectively and say, oh, this is bad, oh, this is good. But again, I think once we're done in this reality, we transcend that good and evil kind of mentality, because again, it's that yin yang, it's that circle.
I couldn't agree more. I feel like this oneness doesn't care about the good or evil.
Right.
It's just running
the
cycle.
It's indifferent to it for sure.
For sure.
I think so.
Like there's no thing. I don't, like, personally, when I envision this, I don't think there's no thing being like, oh, this is good and this is bad. It's just doing the circle. Right. And again, I feel like that's just correlates again to like what you're saying. It's like, it's just an experience. It's not a bad one. It's just an experience. And maybe that's where this whole like inner tuition comes from, this like inner wisdom of things, of just like maybe common sense of like shared stuff along the line of this like evolution. And Robert dives into this as well,
right?
Of just humans and like your best version of you and the worst version of you. They're not necessarily the best or worst of you. It's you.
Yeah.
And he really correlated violence with it,
sure.
Which I thought was really amazing, because there's two different types of violence. There's like a violence where like, you know, if someone did something bad to someone, like, and he says this quote unquote, like, you want to beat them up, you want to get back at them for what they did, knowing they did a poor thing, and you wouldn't give a living heck about it.
Right.
But if it was an innocent person, it'd be a different story.
Yeah.
And the different violences that are used in that sense, where you can have violences that you're fight or flight mode, and then there's also violences where like, yeah, you're ready, you're amped, and your heart starts to race faster because you know what's coming, but you're still with it.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
It reminds me of, imagine a soldier trained to kill people, goes to war, kills people, gets medals for it,
right?
Then comes back to society.
Right.
We don't want you killing people anymore.
Right.
But you're still in that mode. But I got medals for this. Like, people wanted me to do this.
It's like identity crisis.
I don't
almost.
we don't want you doing that anymore. That's the frustration of coming back to a society with this knowledge. You know, coming back with the burden of, there's so much more to this reality. Again, it's like the allegory of the cave. Right? You know, Plato's allegory of the cave, right? For anyone listening, imagine there's a cave and there's three figures that are seated.
They're like prisoned up,
with their backs,
chained up.
With their backs to a wall, and they're chained at the neck to the wall. So they can move their heads side to side, but they can't get up and walk around. Behind this wall that they're chained to, there's a fire burning, and in front of the fire, there's figures holding images that cast shadows on the wall in front of these chained individuals. And these chained individuals, that's all they've ever known. They've never known anything outside the cave. And those images that the shadows that dance on the wall in front of them are what they perceive reality to be. So essentially, it's saying reality is a projection of these other objects that are hard for us to even put into words. So this is like Plato's realm of forms, is that's where he gets to. Is that's the next thing, where there's these general forms that reality is being projected through, or reality casts a shadow through these images. It's hard to put into words right now, but essentially the allegory of the cave is, imagine you're one of these people that are chained up and your chains are released, and you get up and you stand up for the first time, and you see these figures walking in front of the fire with these cardboard cutouts on sticks that are projecting these images that you thought was reality. And then the next thing you know, the cave leads to an entrance to the cave, and you go out, and the sun is blinding, and you're seeing all these objects that to you before, as a chained up individual in the cave, you only saw the shadow of. So you only saw the shadow of a butterfly, you only saw the shadow of a horse, but now you're in real reality, and you're seeing what that actual object is, and what that the light was that it was casting a shadow. You were seeing what was casting the shadow now, instead of just the shadow, right? So what it's saying is, in our reality, we're just looking at shadows. We're not looking at what's actually, what is the light is hitting to
what's
make these shadows.
Outside the cave.
And exactly, we're not even outside the cave, right? Which outside the cave, those people that are just holding those images, they're trying to recreate reality for everybody.
Sure.
But it's a pale comparison of what real reality is. But if that's all you're shown, right, in this reality, if that's all you're being shown, that's all you're going to know, and you're going to think that that's reality. So by eating psychedelics, taking mushrooms, doing something like that, transcendental meditation, you are now exiting the cave. Now the hardest part is bringing that information back
to the cave,
because those people that are chained up don't want to hear it.
They kill you.
Right. He's telling
Just
the truth.
like
Kill
Bill
him.
Hicks said, right? Those people that come back to us with this knowledge and say, hey, it's just a ride. Don't worry. Everything's okay. It's going to be okay. We kill them.
It's not always physical either. Like, you can mentally kill someone just by the challenge.
Well,
right?
that's the thing. And
that's where those egos get into conflict again.
Sure.
Like, you come back and you understand that yours is so small, and then theirs and yours, whether you know it or not, will fight. And it's like how well tuned in to the fact that it's all a show.
Right.
Well, that's almost, again,
without
that's almost
getting
one
like
thing.
without getting like influence back into that.
That's exactly. Well,
Right.
that's where I see.
Exactly.
Without getting inflated back into their inflation, because you were able to suppress yours.
Well, that's where I almost see the ego as an overprotective figure. So if we look at it like that, it kind of
that just wants to be loved.
Softens the image of the ego a little bit. And again, like I said, that moment where I was like, "Hey man, it's all good. I love you. Sit down." It was like, when it sat down, it kind of sat back into me, because I knew it was my ego or shadow or whatever. And it's always like, hey, and you got to be like, yo, man, everything's okay.
It's now bringing that into like the interaction that you have with people here, like after the trip, after you're doing, like while you're doing the work, is you almost have to get outside of yourself to be like, both of you now calm down. Like me, my ego, calm down, and also like know you're gonna have to somewhat handle the other person's ego naturally. It's not that it's not to say like the person's got like, oh, big ego, Sure. It's just naturally we all have it. So it's like, get out of both people, the person you're dealing with and yourself, to be like, both of you calm down.
Right.
Like, you're good.
Yeah. And that's the thing, it can be reassuring to some people who want it to be, and it can also be like so infuriating to people who are so tied to their ego.
That's it.
They can view that as like, what do you think? You know
You're
everything,
better than me?
Right? Who are you?
You know who I am. You think this and that. It's like, you can clearly see that there's this, that their egos become so much a part of them that they can't even accept that it even exists. Right? Again, how many people really are walking around out there not really understanding what the ego is? We talk about it all the time. We hear people say, oh, that guy's egotistical. Narcissism gets thrown around all the time. To even understand what that is, again, you know, we live in a reductionist society, so the way we kind of figure stuff out is by bringing it down to the lowest common denominator. And doing mushrooms is going to bring your experience with the ego down to the lowest common denominator. If anything, it's going to separate and disintegrate your relationship with your ego, and then when it comes back, you're gonna know what it is, right? But again, that is one way. It's not the only way of finding out stuff, but it's a good way to remove something, right? You know, you don't know what you have till it's gone, kind of thing. Once you've even just temporarily felt a loosening of the bond, like I almost, in some ways, there's no way I I don't think in any ways I destroyed my ego. Obviously it still exists, so I don't think I destroyed it, but at a certain, however you want to look at it, I got pulled apart from it from a while. So if there's an elastic band that still exists between me and the ego, yeah, maybe, but that's it. I'm far away. I can at least experience a lesser degree, and then that just teaches me so much more about when that does snap back. I know, okay, this is what I'm dealing with now, right? Rather than, what is this feeling I'm having? What the hell's going on? What is this shadowy thing that's following me and making me feel certain things? It's like, oh, it's your guide to this reality. It's trying to protect you, because if you were just pure spirit in this reality, you wouldn't be able to get a job, and you wouldn't be able to pay bills and
walk in front of
and survive. Like, you wouldn't even be able to put two sticks together to put a roof on your head. You'd literally be like in bliss mode all the time and be like, everything's love, and you're just like, this is unreal,
right? 100%.
But then you don't eat, and then you don't drink Watts, and then all of a sudden you're done, right? So, you know, there's it can go bad, but that's where I feel the ego has developed, in the sense to say, hey, you know, we got to get up tomorrow. And
your ego knows,
you're back.
At least mine does, that it's taken that separation or that break for a bit and come back.
Right. Yeah. In a sense, you're
It's
giving
like,
the ego a break too.
It's like, right.
It gets a break from you.
Right.
Instead of, I got to watch over this
it's like this
idiot.
It's like this like weird duality that comes with it too.
Right. Well, exactly.
It's like, hey, I'm back. Like, it knows that it went somewhere to begin with, for it to even be like, hey, what's up?
Well, because there's always this, again, I always harken back to movies and TVs. Like, what's the idea of this guardian angel? What's the idea of this thing that follows you around? Like, you know, A Wonderful Life, Touched by an Angel. There's all these different things where it's literally like a guide following you around. Video games, there's always some Pikachu and Pokemon Yellow literally following you around as this helper, which is very positive, right? But we look at it as this guy following us around and just sabotaging us and putting a stick in our spokes and fucking with us.
Yeah.
And I think that's an unhealthy ego.
Yeah.
Right.
But a healthy ego is there to help
relationship.
A healthy relationship.
you. And in a healthy relationship, there's no power games. In a healthy relationship, no one's going to want to say, hey, get out of my way. This is my job right now.
Exactly.
In an unhealthy relationship, there's even as the person fighting against the ego, you can be like, I don't have one. It doesn't exist. Fight against it. I got to dissolve it. I got to get rid of it. And then you might experience a moment away from it, but then when it comes back, it's going to come back with full force, right? Because I just think it comes with this reality.
It's like the Kool-Aid man jumping through the wall.
And that's not always like by your choosing either. The way your ego's going to come up is not by your choosing.
Right.
Like something's going to happen in your life, bang, you're going to be just hit with like, oh man, this is my experience and I was totally just clocked out.
And if you're like, I never wanted this and I've been trying actively to dissolve it and get rid of it, now it's there even harder, you're going to be even more distressed, right? Whereas if you've spent the time and dealt with it and like, you know, Jung calls it shadow work and stuff, and if you've dealt with it and spent the time on it, when there are moments where it does jump out at you, or you clash with another person's ego and your ego feels like it needs to step up to the plate a little bit more, you know, at least that's what's happening. Like there's something so much more
aware.
That awareness is so much more empowering to be like, all right, you know, I know what's happening now. I have a way better idea of how my ego does react to these certain things. The fact that I even have an ego, right? Like some people, again, that I can more or less personify it in my mind and understand what it is. I can't speak for everyone, but, you know, until you do know, right? Like it's hard to realize, because the ego is a con man. It because it wants to protect you. It wants to run the show. That's how I see it, right?
Yeah, it also protects you too. You know, whatever you don't know won't kill you.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
So
that's the thing. Ignorance is bliss.
Right.
So that's pure ego just going, I'm
taking over. Chill out. Sit down. I got this.
Don't worry about nothing.
Right.
Because that shit's bullshit.
And some people, that's what they also would like.
Right.
They want that. It's kind of like security blanket in a sense. You know what I mean? Just like the sit back.
So in many ways, like, there's nothing bad about it, right?
Right.
Like,
there's nothing bad about it.
Yeah.
Exactly. And that's kind of the point that I'm trying to make, is like there's no good way to go about or bad way to go about it. It's kind of almost like personal choice and seek. Like, we've been on a journey to even discuss this topic to begin with.
Sure.
Even just to bring it up as a conversation has been a journey in and of itself.
And we're still learning.
And for us to be aware of it, exactly.
Yeah.
It's a constant process.
Right.
So like the effort that we're taking to put into it.
Right.
There's some, for others, they're taking effort to not.
And this is even why we're even doing this podcast idea too. I totally agree.
Right.
That the fact that we're even talking about it, it just continues to add to the collective and continues to keep going, right? Because I think, like you just said, you know, some people aren't even talking about it, right? And it's like, you know, at least, and in no ways are we saying that we're experts either. We're just trying to get closer and closer to it, and trying, and by doing this and by actively talking about it. And yeah, we might say a lot of things that are wrong, and we might come to a lot of realizations as we're talking about it, but that's how it's going to happen.
Sure.
And by just thinking, oh, I'm right now, I got all the answers, I'm good. Like even that whole thing with Alan Watts, like once you get the
message, hang up the phone.
Right? Like, I think, hang up the phone, but don't stop learning and don't stop thinking about that.
You
like,
can dial a different number.
You don't have to have 5-hour conversations. You can have like 10 minutes of meditation.
100%.
That's pretty fucking close.
day.
Do that over a month.
Right.
See what happens.
Sure.
Right.
Yeah.
Sure. And like even just knowing that knowledge exists in your mind and living with that is something. You can be a living testament to all this stuff. And I think
Beautiful.
Hopefully what we're talking about will just continue to spread and continue to spread the love, and you know, that's what we're doing. That's why you guys are doing, and that's why you guys are doing yours.
It's to spread knowledge and, you know, wisdom,
and hopefully
also receive as well.
And hopefully people that are listening too, that may have never even thought about this stuff, they start to get an idea,
start cracking some shells,
because that's how it has to go. It has to be spread that way. It has to be spread around, and that's the only way we can do it.
That's the only way, exactly, man. That's the perfect way to end it.
Nice. Beautiful, brother. I love it.
That was sick. That was beautiful.
Nice. Awesome, man. Always a pleasure.
So much for having me back,
Can't
man.
wait till next time. Man. Hey everyone, thanks for listening. That was awesome. If you liked what you heard, please subscribe, rate the podcast, check out the Patreon, Bigmark, patreon.com/thebigmarkpod. We love you. We'll see you soon. Cheers.
Peace. Thanks, J-Man.